Okay, we're back. This is LA Rathbone. Welcome to part 3 of the first Slackware series, which is installing Slackware. Now, on the last occasion, we got as far as installing all the packages and doing some of the setup stuff for our system. But now what they want to know is which startup services that we want to run on boot. Now, let's just go through these. Let's go through these one by one and make our decision. AppleTalk, print server, definitely not going to need that. Bind, I'm not going to be running a DNS server on my system, so I'm going to say no. Most people are going to want to say enable the cups service because that will allow you to print on Slackware. That's the default printing system that they have. It used to be LPRNG, but that's since been outdated by cups. Cups is pretty good. I'm not going to be running a DHCP server on my machine. This is a nice service to have. The Fuse service is nice to have running, especially for the desktop environments that make use of that functionality. I'm not going to run an Apache web server on this system. I think that goes beyond the scope of this video, so I'm going to leave it disabled. The iNetD daemon, it is nice to have. It allows certain services to be started from iNetD, so a lot of these services are starting on their own, but iNetD lets you start a lot of little services through one daemon. I say most people don't need it, especially for a desktop system, but let's leave it on for now. Who knows, maybe we'll play around with it later. I'm not going to need IP forward. Message bus, definitely leave enabled, especially if you're going to be using a desktop environment. I'm not going to be running a MySQL server. I like to have the NTP time server enabled usually because it lets you have your time synced up with the internet and give you an accurate time on your machine. I'm not going to bother with this install, but I think that most people should enable it. I don't have a PCMCIA or card bus device on this machine. It's a desktop machine and not like an ancient laptop, so I'm not going to actually. Let's enable NFS because maybe we'll play around with that later. Let's enable Samba. We'll play around with that later. I'm not going to be using SASL. Now SendMail is good if you want to be able to accept email and send email from around the world, but a lot of ISPs block it because it's used by spammers a lot, and also there's some security issues with it. I think that those are usually patched frequently, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it disabled for now, and if it turns out that we need it later on, I'll turn it on, and I'll show you how to turn on services if need be, but I'm going to leave it off for now because most people will not need it. I'm not going to use that SNM, whatever that is. I'm not really familiar with that. Definitely keep syslog enabled because you need a system logger running at all times on a sane system. I'm going to leave SSHD enabled, though most people will not need it. This allows you to access your machine via a secure shell from a remote location. Now, most people are running on routers, so you'd have to open port 22 for that to work, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Let's hit OK. You want to try out some custom screen fonts? Nah. Now, what you do here is choose whether you want your hardware clock to be set to UTC or to be set to its own local time. So what that means is if you set it to UTC, then your machine, the hardware of your machine is actually set to universal, whatever it's called, Greenwich Mean Time. Even if you're in a different time zone. And what your computer then goes ahead and does is adjusts it accordingly. Basically, you don't really need to know why they're giving you these two options, but except for the fact that what the conventional wisdom is, if you're running Linux and Windows, say no and set it to local time. But if you're just running Linux, it's better to set it to yes, to set it to UTC time. So I'm going to say yes here. Choose my time zone. I'm in the Eastern time zone. They want to know which window manager we want to use for X. KDE is the one that I use at home. I like it. It works well. It's full featured and everything. But let's do something a little bit different for this demonstration. If I even run X at all, I might not. But let's use Window Maker and be a little bit different here. They want to know if we want to set a root password. Yes, we do, definitely. So otherwise, your system will be highly vulnerable to attacks. So we'll say yes here. I'm going to make my password. Note that it's not echoed back to you. Nothing appears on the screen. That's okay. Just enter it and hit enter. And they want me to re-enter it. Just do the same thing. Okay, I changed the password. Press enter to continue. All right. We've completed the installation, but we haven't really completed the installation. We're going to have to do some other things, but let's hit OK here to reboot our machine. We want to go ahead and exit the Slackware setup. There we go. Now they want us to reboot. So I'm going to put this video on pause and meet you back here. All right, we're back. When you see the Lilo menu, just press enter, and then you'll be greeted with our lovely Slackware boot up. No, sorry about that. So you'll note that Slackware does not have a graphical boot up installed by default. There may be one available in third-party repositories or via the Slack builds system, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, well, actually, I'm never going to install a graphical boot up. I don't really care for it, but if you wanted to, that's how you do it. But Slackware, it's not really the Slackware way, to be honest with you. And you'll note that the Slackware boot takes quite a while. And that's just because Slackware is a very old school distribution. A lot of other distributions have done things to make the boot up faster. That's just not really a priority for Slackware. The priority for Slackware is just to keep things very straightforward, very to the point, very simple, and not to hide Linux from the user, which is very good for a tutorial. So they want us to log in. We're going to log in as root. And we're going to enter our password. I think I might have typed my own password wrong. So if you do it wrong, it'll just let you log in again. There we go. All right, now it says we have mail. So let's check what our mail says using my favorite email program for the console, Mutt. So type MUTT, enter. They're saying we don't have a mailbox in our root folder. Sure, let's create that. Hit enter. We have 2 new messages. Both of them are to root. Register with the Linux Counter project. Let's just take a look at that. It's from root to root. I'm not going to bother with that. To exit the email, hit I. Now go down to this one, hit enter. And this is a message from Patrick Volkerding telling us a few things about Slackware. He always likes to do his smiley faces with a little nose, and that's kind of cute. So they're telling us about tools that we can use to configure our system, and we're going to use some of them, but not all of them. Now, this package tool, we've already installed every single package on the whole DVD except for the KDE series, so we're not going to be using that program for quite some time. But this tells you about them. Slack package, I'm not going to bother with that, but maybe we'll try to play around with it later. Netconfig, we already ran a lot of these programs during the installer, so I don't know why they're telling us this. But anyway, we're not going to go through that. Just hit Q again to quit. Now, we've looked at our welcoming email, so the next step is we want to add a user, because it's not really very safe to be running your system as root, because root can delete any file, can modify any file, and you can really shoot yourself in the foot by doing that. So you want to create a limited user account that you'll be using for everyday purposes. So There's multiple ways of doing this, of course, but let's do it the easiest way that I know. And we will type the add user command. It's a script that allows you to, that generates a user add command, which is the standard way of adding a user, but it just makes it a little more user friendly. So my login name is going to be, let's make my login name Pop Rocks, because that's my old username on IRC. If we just hit enter here, it uses the next user ID available. That's fine. Initial group users, let's leave that as is. Now they're telling us that we can add our user to optional groups. Now they don't show any on the screen here, but the little trick is if you press up, it gives you a whole list of suggested defaults, and that's very helpful. That's very helpful, I think. So I'm going to hit enter there. Our home directory, you should leave that as is. Home username. Shell, I'm a bash user. I think most people are. I'm going to press enter. Expiry date, I'm not going to have one. Hit enter. And now they're just confirming that we really want to do it. We're going to say yes. If you want it to bail out, you could hit Control C. We're not going to do that. Full name. Well, my full name is L.A. Rathbone. Just leave that blank. I don't have a room number. I'm not going to enter in all this stuff here. Now they want a new password for us. It's probably better if you do use a different password than you did for root. So re-enter. Okay, we've created our user. So why don't we just switch to that user to I'll show you how to do that. SU-L and then the username. Whoops. And it doesn't ask us for a password or anything because we were root, and root can do anything, including switch to any user without requiring a password. So why don't we try to do it the usual way? Hit exit. That logs us out of our user account, takes us back to root. Let's hit log out again. Now let's log in as our user. Habits. Pop Rocks. Okay, and you'll note that every time you start up your system by default, it gives you a little fortune cookie message. I like that. I think it's kind of cute. I'm going to leave it, but you can always disable that if you want to. Now if we hit ls, use that command, we can see what's in our folder, and there's nothing in our home directory. ls-a shows us that there are actually a couple things in there. We've got the bash history file, we've got the screen.rc file. You can always use the less command to see what's in the screen.rc, and it's just a default file. You know, you may be wondering, L.A. Rathbone, where do these files come from? Why isn't your home directory empty when you first start your system? The reason is there is a directory called etsy-skell. Let's take a look at that. That has all the files in it when you first start your when any new user's home directory is created. And I use the ls-la command, which says the L means show me more details about files. So it shows the different permissions, it shows who owns the files, as well as the size and the date that they're created. And the A command tells us we want to see hidden files as well as non-hidden files. And the screen.rc file is a configuration file that starts with a dot. And when you start a file with a dot in Linux, it makes it hidden. Otherwise, you'd have configuration files cluttering up everything. So that's where those files came from. But that's enough under our user account for now. Let's log out. Let's log back in as root. Clear that screen, and we're out of time. So on the next occasion, we will continue our setup of the system. The installation is now complete. This is L.A. Rathbone signing off. Have a good day.